maybe with nice and very calm discussion talk, we can say, maybe you should address that anger to Mr. and Mrs. who founded, I don't know, General Electric and dumped all that poisonous stuff into the rivers and oceans. And for over 100 years or so, because we have been using it, our genotype with very small alleles, combinations of fractions of genetic material on our chromosome changes, that this happens. It's just me. You see, I like talking this way because I feel a little comfortable reading all about this, studying it, but that I hope might be incentive to you to do the same. Because believe it or not, sciences are neither religious nor agnostic. You see, those discoveries, that pursuit is only methodology, way of achieving either criticizing something, the theory, by proving it to be more polished, jeweled, and finally valid, or dismantling it. You see? And that's what science always has been and always will be. Notions of atheism, agnosticism, even anti-Catholicism, does not flow from sciences. They flow from deep hurt of someone along the way by the people of faith. Don't be that person to hurt someone on the level of the faith, because that hurt, although your heart not physically bleeding, but look how deep it stays, how long it continues. You are familiar with the name of the genius who is part of the topic tonight naturally, because we'll talk a little bit about those initial moments of the universe and black holes, Mr. Stephen Hawking, late Stephen Hawking. How brilliant physician and mathematician he was, cosmologist. But before he got very ill with that chromosomal change in his allele, in one of the building blocks of his cell, he was very happily married, pursuing career, having life, so to speak, being that faith person. I think Anglican, if I'm not mistaken, Episcopalian. But you know, when this happens and you cannot explain why, you turn everything, even your own anger and your own very being and talent from God against God. You see? To say, you cannot be if this happens to me. And we will go a little bit deeper on that level, but that is one of the reasons I hope maybe we can talk about this. And now I'd like to divide with you this whole idea of existence of evil into very proper understanding, my friends. Two categories that we always have to keep in mind speaking about or trying to reason why. What went wrong? Because physical evil, existence of evil, can be very beautifully explained, linking it with the handout that you have in your package, 2 pages of those graphs explaining or going back with mathematical and physical vectors to the beginning of the universe, of whatever exists. On one page, the smaller scan in black, you see that white little beginning called quantum fluctuations or inflation. Many scientists would use the word state of supercondensed energies. Vernacular culture, especially in the English-speaking countries, would call that very moment of that white, bright moment here, Big Bang. Because, you know, for that Big Bang, for that moment to happen, we have to pose the question, what was before that? When you turn the page, you will see in more visible way on the bottom of the page something that in the sciences of cosmology, of those magnum things, something called arrow of time. You see it? Arrow of time. In other words, the history of the universe, that white arrow, the first one, at the bottom of the page. And what was before that, you see? We are refraining for a reason now, take in parentheses, bracket it, and then by doing so, you are doing philosophizing. You are doing very philosophical function called phenomenological reduction after Edmund Husserl and phenomenology movement from the 19th century, because we are taking now in parentheses, we are suspending, not discussing everything we know about religion. You see, a religious aspect of those explanations. Now we try to narrow down or zoom back with mathematicians and physicians through equations and telescopes, right? Only to those initial moments when everything has begun. But you see, it cannot be avoided, the question about, when you flip again the page, the question about what was before that bright moment, that light. What was before that? You know, scientists, many of the cosmologists and philosophers would like to say it was if you can imagine it, like the balloon, like a huge one, with that little constraint when the air flows, of possibilities, ideas. They call it information that takes shape and form from all those possibilities to be inflated or deflated, whichever way you'd like to see it, narrowed down to that very, very narrow point of something. And then in the handout you have a little bit better explanation of it, of something that is called often that constraining of possibilities that produces information, produces something rather than nothing, you see, that actually had a chance to be. Some from theoretical or maybe even real reasoning about what was before that bright moment of everything becoming, what we can reason, and most of the scientists would agree, was the information. Initial, original conditions of the universe that was coded then, encoded through Big Bang in you and me. Beautiful concept, idea, that information being present. But what we also know, looking at those graphs, we know a little something from your high school education, high school classes, and maybe even 8th grade physics about the second law of thermodynamics, or the law of entropy. That entropy, disperse of the energy from the very beginning of that white bright moment we call Big Bang, that with mathematical calculation and physical vectors, scientists can go back to maybe 14.5 billion years, they say, that might have happened, that everything began in existence. Very quickly, it became in a split millisecond, like I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it's in your handout, 10 to minus 24th millisecond, my friends, that we're talking trillions milliseconds ago. All that happened. And with initial, very high, very organized entropy, you know what happens when energy disperses itself in the universe. Anything fluctuates, but mostly never collects itself again. It's lost forever. And therefore, that state, each state, you, me, that table, this planet, moon, system, when it reaches that equilibrium, that thermal death, so to speak, when there is no more fuel, no more energy, everything dies. And that, my friend, is the argument for something called natural or physical evil. In organized structures, entropy, time running away, so to speak, and that's the opening words for the handout, tempus fugit. I use it once and then because it beautifully explains what happens to us. Everything we gain and every comfort level we achieve, we lose. We don't see it yet, but we are slowly dying. You see, that's inevitable law of physics that was encoded here in that brightest of moments of becoming. And then, only then, rightly so, when you flip that page again, that arrow of time, history of universe begins. Because before that, there is no time. Just random, endless balloon of possibilities, or balloons. Or our universe is not the first one nor the last one to exist, you see. when we would like to, maybe for entertainment, pursue the idea of multiverses, M theories, so to speak, or string theories, theory of everything that tries to unify gravitational field and quantum mechanics. But I hope, my friends, that this helps us to understand a little bit what we are talking about, that we are timely. Time begins with creation, with that inflation, or that expansion, or that Big Bang, and the prize, the token for experiencing, living it, being part of it, is decay, is thermal, natural disaster of death. But you see, when we think about this universe, to pretty much first ring, first circle, from the Big Bang to that time of, let's say, now, so to speak, in that global scale, that universe, that everything we know, when you think about this, it's naturally good, innocent. It's just physical evil that we don't have control of. We have to name it somehow, is one of the forces that brings this all into perspective together. And you see, before someone appears on that timeline, on that arrow of time, human being, voila, here am I, or here I come, that innocent universe is still innocent. Even a-religiously, before religions even formed in some practical ways, I hope you see it, that very innocent, natural state of existence. Many religions would like to call it paradise, that state that God intended to be. And then yet, because you and I appear thinking creatures at some point in that arrow of time, among those rings here, we now can talk about second level category of evil, which is moral evil. And that's what concerns us and is part of the topic, so to speak, from Big Bang to Auschwitz and Gulag, what went wrong. Because that moral evil implies, like ethics, morality, implies what? Choice. You come to the forklift, either or. And with that first choice, human beings had to make, look what happened. They didn't choose so right, as the Bible or story, religiously speaking, tries to explain to us. And maybe that is the reason that we fall into the category of the physical law and share the same clay of the earth, the same matter, the kingdom of animals with everything else. Maybe we were intended differently by that endless possibilities we call God, you see? With actual what makes him God and makes this sense is that endless possibility comes to eventually the selection of the one with the information coded through Big Bang that it exists. Remember when we talked about everything and anything can exist in one's mind. It does not mean it exists for real. Show me square circle. And I will believe you, everything you say. Show me one, you see? But that's the beauty of philosophing, of critical thinking about everything we experience, my friends, including this. And bear with me patiently, because now this third, and home, maybe you can read this again, it will make a little bit more sense, hopefully, to you, because with my thick accent and mispronouncing some of the categories and things, I hope I'm not confusing you even more about this. But the point is, my friends, that free choice, that freedom of choice, that only human, for some reason, beings enjoy, made that moral evil possible. God made it possible. It's a big stretch, because he gave us that possibility, that will, so to speak. Is it free will? I still believe it is, because it's not in the genotype, it's not my genetic material. It's not only data unfolding, like I will be like my dad was and my mom was, and there is no escape from hell sometimes. It is. It is, you see, that liberation. You don't have to be like them. And that's the beauty of it. And that's how religion and faith tries to convince us that by practicing of some of the ways, virtues, revelations can prove that you cannot be chained your whole life to whatever your parents or grandparents made mistakes. You see? And that's the beauty of idea that we can maybe in some intelligible way speak about those things, my friends, as people of faith and make it easier as an argument or discussion with our friends who might have a little bit more difficulties understanding this than we do. But also, what I wanted to point your attention to is, before we move a little bit deeper, is that throughout, you see, we talked about those initial beautiful cosmological things, the Big Bang, which is very, when you think about this, vulgar, childish way of explaining all this that you see in front of you and you have studied and many people study for generations. But then yet, the beauty of it and why it is important for us to speak about this is the mystery of what? Of time. Time. Does time exist forever? Does time begin with the arrow of time, begins with the Big Bang, with that initial state of supercondensed energies? Only then we can talk about time. Like asymmetry, a timely universe might still be a possibility. How do we know that time flows the same way it does here elsewhere, if that elsewhere exists? You see, philosophical question starts with this. Why something rather is than is not? Why something rather exists than not? Who decides? Why? How come? And then answers, you see, when we go through history of philosophy, of critical thinking, starting with the written, recorded sources, tell us from one of the Platonic dialogues, Plato's dialogues, Phaedo, because of the goodness. The teleology, final goal of everything that we know and who we are is goodness. In ideas of Plato, he is idealist, right? His world is ideal world. This is not important. This is just the cave. We are the shadows, mere shadows of who we really are. He has that intuition, you see, that the goodness, those moments of kindness that we experience have something bigger and better that may be the goal of everything that exists. Goodness. You see? And then we can go after or about every single philosopher and try to see what they think about the reason for that something rather to be than not to be. Shakespearean, I miss that skull, that beautiful Shakespearean, to be or not to be. I mean, we are missing the dramatics, and that is why we're becoming so cynical and cold, I think, at the end. But I hope you see it, my friends. And here in our discussion from the Big Bang to Gulag and Auschwitz, please, I hope you see that I only give you 3 examples here now. Why? Because we are comfortable with those times, comfortable with those people that I'm going to mention, comfortable with the texts because we have heard them. 3 of many people who try to give us something called theodicy, bringing God to the stand. Why God? Book of Job from the Old Testament. That's the beautiful theodicy, asking, trying God in a court why evil exists, why all those evil things happen to Job. You all are familiar with the story of Job, right? How he loses everything, literally everything. And on that pile of the manure, he sits, and instead of cursing God with his raised fist, he says what? I know that my Redeemer lives and might not see in my lifetime the day of my vindication, but I know he will avenge me and all those misfortunes. That's Old Testament answer to the problem of evil. Not physical evil, you see, decay, equilibrium, laws of physics, because that time, you see, that idea of time, if it exists, it's part of that information, of that law of physics that we don't know where they come from. Why they operate in such a way that they eventually come together, produce something beautiful, like this object, that construction, that structure, that eventually, when it's done, decays right away. It loses that energy, entropy, you see? And going back to the second person that I mentioned here that can help us to understand and maybe reason a little bit with the idea why evil exists, why God allows evil in the world, is the German, should I say Prussian philosopher Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. He lived, if I'm not mistaken, from 1648 maybe or 46 to 1714 or 16. And then he came up with the idea in his two books, very famous ones. For some reason, not too many people are excited about them, but I cannot get enough of them. One is called monadology, because that's how Leibniz explains everything, and you and me, that we are like open-ended universes, self-sufficient. And then the Greek word for it, monads, he used monadology, hence the book. And another booklet, essays, short essays in the form of book on the beauty or power of God, freedom of man, and then existence of evil, called Theodicy, book that he writes, in which he explains and says something extremely important. Why? Because this is the best of all possible worlds. You see how he philosophically, intuitively touches on something that modern physicists or astrophysicists talk about, that inflated possibilities, random. Who knows how we could have been, but then that God decides that for that chance for you and I to exist, this needs to happen. Boom, so to speak. And then everything unfolds, you know? And then Leibniz says that in philosophical ways, and then how beautifully he intuitively calls into that stand three categories of evil. For him, for Leibniz, those definitions or categories of evil, one is spiritual, moral, which is sin. Very one that is, he calls it physical, very practical evil, and he calls it suffering. We suffer. And very metaphysical, purely philosophical, that he calls human limitations. We have limits. I would love to, and that makes me either humble or crazy, you see? And how beautifully he intuitively touches upon the depths of human mystery and human heart. In addition, he comes like Blaise Pascal, of course, with some of those beautiful probabilities and how they, you know, in the 17th century, with the candle and the glass hour and maybe skull, how they played poker, the cards, right? And then either win or lose everything. And how they come with those ideas of what is the possibility that I will win next time. So if any of you go to Mohegan Sun, to Chichen, read Leibniz and Pascal and their probabilities, not because they were foremost mathematicians, physicists. On top of it, they were philosophers, you see. And then the third person who, in my opinion, humble opinion, gives us a little bit of the idea of why human suffering exists. Why do we do evil things? Is John Paul II in his apostolic letter from, I believe it's 1984 or 85. You have it in the handout written, called Salvifici Doloris, on the mystery of human suffering. To be exact, on the redemptive value and mystery of human suffering. When Pope, and remember, before he became Pope, he was also philosopher. He was also who saw what happens in Gulag and Auschwitz. He saw it firsthand. His friends, classmates from his school bands, Jewish, were burned through the chimneys of concentration and then death camps in in occupied Poland and Germany, in Gross-Rosen and Stutthof. And you see, my friends, after all this experience, when he is a pope, genuinely he tries to answer that question, why people suffer. He says, I don't know. Like every other person before me and after me, I can only grope in darkness and give you idea of what I know because of Jesus. And he shows me because he is God, but look what happens. He suffers on that cross. Therefore, Pope says that suffering has some meaning, some real value. And Pope even says maybe even co-redemptive value. When you suffer, not because you've done something, but because, I don't know, something happened on your, fraction of the chromosome, on that allele, the group of those little markers that make you and sick, very sick. It's not your fault. It's nobody's fault. But what Pope says, but when you see it, when you try to see it in the light of what Jesus did for us, the pure innocence, like you see that universe innocent before even we have begun, like he was always with that Father, pure innocence, he suffers. And then therefore, maybe when you suffer, when you try to accept and even offer that suffering for someone you love, for something that is dear to your heart, that's how it's co-redemptive. That's how it has value. That's like every tear and every sweat and every pain, needle in your body is not wasted, Pope says, you see in that letter. I don't know if it's true or not. God has granted me relatively good health still in my 40s. I don't even know what's going to happen next decade or two, right? But he will spare me from that suffering because it's no fun. It's no easy to suffer, you see. But when you do, how you go about this? How you go about your suffering? And that is why, my friends, I hope that in addition to those three elements that I think can help us as Catholics from our Catholic perspective to reason, to deal with the question why evil exists, I would like you to go through your pages of your handout and pull out this one. It's a square box with the map, physical map on top of it, with like a little hills. You see it? For a very reason, I did not write down what it is, but it's going to be very obvious in a second. Do you have it in front of you? That square, like a cinder block almost look like, but it's a map. It's a physical map underneath Alps, between Switzerland and France, I believe. You see it? And underneath those Alps, it's a huge structure called Large Hadron Collider. It's a structure where astrophysicists, all the smart people of today, would like to, and it takes that ring with all the piping beneath, it's like, I think, 19 miles or something long. It's huge. It has been built for the last 3 decades, I believe. And a few years ago, those scientists working underneath Alps, Swiss and French Alps, were able to accelerate through those pipings, through that Hadron Collider, the particle almost to the speed of what? Light, which is constant. We cannot fathom even faster speed than light, right? Because when we do, it's one of those, like Leibniz says, probabilities. We don't know what will happen. We only can argue. Argument almost proved it. It was very, to the millisecond, almost acceleration of those particles to the speed of light, but it was suspended for many reasons probably. One was probably sanity, because the idea of that collider, an idea of that research is to find something that is pictured on another page of the handout, Higgs boson. You probably have heard about that many times over the last 15 years. But a few years ago, scientists that work with such stuff were able to identify it, found it, so to speak, and then they tried to prove or isolate it. Because what it is, you have the explanation here of what that Higgs boson is, but in vernacular language, especially English-speaking countries, scientists would like to call it God's particle. Because between quantum mechanics and natural Newtonian physics, all the interactions of the elements that you have explained on another handout or on the back of this one, and we are talking about subatomic physics here, quantum physics, but nonetheless with now very powerful computers, everything is observable, almost in real time. Well, the borders exist. Remember when we talk about how sciences have borders intrinsically from within and from the outside? From within is, of course, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, when you cannot measure in the same time speed and position of some of those elements. But the explanation of it is that possibly the tiniest of the elements that puts everything together, that Higgs boson, is responsible for appearing, for things appearing, being, existence. You see who wants to play God now? And maybe that's the reason they stopped. Scientists stopped, for now, at least, with acceleration, with those experiments. Because in essence, what they are trying to do is, if their theory proves, and it seems like it does prove, the visible universe, and you and I, and everything we experience, it's only about 14% of what's out there. Everything else is what? We call it dark matter, precisely. And if you ever would like to explore a little bit with good acting, never made a blockbuster, but the movie with Matthew McConaughey called, escaped the tip of my tongue, called Interstellar. Maybe some of you watched it. I recommend it highly because it is a movie about what we are talking about. How in the future, those people are ready to accelerate to the or near to speed of light and even have vessels, vehicles capable of traveling. And then eventually they go to the edge of black hole. And then they come out of it, you see, which is now unknown. Theory proves, and that was Stephen Hawking, Mr. Hawking, saying that nothing can escape that black hole. Nothing. That gravitational field is so dense, so heavy, it's so dense that it pulls everything. Not even light can escape. But you see, something is been proven there wrong. That's not so. And that movie tries to show that Matthew McConaughey, how he escapes. Remember, those of you who watched the movie, I don't want to spoil it, but it's the movie motion picture, how he escapes the black hole and becomes the fraction of the letter in the library of the books. You see there. We don't know what the Higgs boson would do. I don't know what would happen to me if I meet those conditions. What I do know is, in another handout in the pile, you see those scales of nature. You see it, my friends, the scales of nature. If you can just pull this one up. Scales of nature. I hope you see it. I hope you can pull it off. Right? Scales of nature. And can you locate scale, which is somehow circled with that red dotting system, red dot scale, from 10, 0, in other words 10, zoom in and zoom out to the ways that we feel comfortable about? You see it, how narrow it is in the scale of everything we know? In other words, that red circle around the tens on the green, you see it? How we are comfortable maybe to few zeros after comma or few zeros after one, because our mind, our body, as you see it, and that's that famous Da Vinci, right? If I'm not mistaken, in the circle, that's where you have that 10 natural scale of you and I. We feel comfortable about 1,000 or maybe even 10,000s back and 10,000s into the future, right? Otherwise, our mind is very uncomfortable. We freeze. It pains. It hurts. When we try to talk about, think, The closest stellar system to our sun, our star, unfortunately we cannot see it because it is located in the Centauri constellation in the southern one, so Australia or Argentina, maybe a trip. The closest one to us, to our sun, is this double system with the mother star and companion called Proxima Centauri. That's how that star is called. It's a red dwarf, so already past our sun's evolution. In other words, life does not exist there anymore, if ever did. It's too late, right? But it's located only 4.2, let's say, for the practical reason, light years from our sun, from our star. So easy, 4 years, right? But light years. That is 24 trillion miles away. Sun from the Earth is located 149 million kilometers, so it's 90 point something miles, right? Million miles, right? And for that, you see, speed of light from the corona of that sun, nuclear explosions that are happening all over the sun, right? And within, for that light to reach your retina, the bottom of your ear, beautiful system too, and so many things to talk about, but we don't have time. For that to do that, to happen, that light needs, see, 92 million miles? It needs 8.2 minutes, I'm sorry. We live in the delay. 8.2 minutes. Almost 9 minutes. You see how delayed we are? Cover 24 trillion miles to that Proxima Centauri. Even with the speed of light, you see, would take you 4 years to travel there. And then experiments with twins were conducted precisely about cosmology and maybe next time we can talk about time, actually, and what it is, and how beautifully we don't realize of what it is. Twins, for 10 years was the minimum of commitment to that experiment, were asked to live the high elevation over 20, I believe, 1,000 feet, really high mountains, and in the delta. Time flew differently for them. After 10 years, one looked younger than the other. And that proves what? Relativity theory, curvature of space and time. Even with the minimal difference of mountain, hilltop, and delta, river level, how different, but it takes time, you see? In other words, some people say, and even philosophers, time doesn't exist. Okay, true, but prove it, show me. And then when they are smart, they would, because they would go to Stephen Hawking and the cosmology physicists of today and would say in physics, especially quantum physics and cosmology, larger experience of physics, time of here and now does not exist. It's not personal. It's very subjective, because for the outsider, let's say someone like Miss Chloe Ballard, hi Chloe, if we will catapult her to Proxima Centauri 4 light years from now, 25 trillion, hello Mr. Biden, giving us $1.2 trillion, 24 trillion miles away, when she would look at you and me, at our tiny planet, would look less like than that. You see here, probably wouldn't even be able to see it. She would see sun, our sun, like a maybe dimmed little, I don't know. So for her, looking at us, time would not exist. You see, past, present, and future for Chloe, that far away, will be irrelevant. It exists in one block. And therefore time, yes, it is only subjective experience. In other words, for me to say, I am here and now, would be completely different than for Margie to say, here and now. Even that distance of, let's say, 10 feet makes a huge difference, because you see, When we think about someone saying the same thing in Argentina or Japan with time difference and all this, how now and here? It means completely something different for that person than for me. I know it's a little elusive. I know it's a little, that's why philosophy, that's why I love it, thinking about those things, because it helps me to realize how insignificant I am, which is not depressive like in Dostoevsky's novels, Crime and Punishment. It's actually very encouraging. So with that millisecond of time I have in global scale, maybe instead of blowing it, completely passing it, tempus fugit, time is running away, I can use it to something good. Use it to something good. And you see, modern physics and then idea of so-called unifying theory of that physics, like that star, Proxima Centauri, and all that we talk about time. The Rosetta Stone, so to speak, you are familiar with the term Rosetta Stone, what it is? Of course, it's a computer system for the languages, right? But original Rosetta Stone, how was it found about 200 years before Jesus was born, right? And then eventually of what it is a plaque that has a very non-essential description of some law, but in 3 languages that people who deciphered those languages were able to decipher what? Egyptian hieroglyphics. We just did a little thing with our 8th grade students on hieroglyphics. You see, that Rosetta Stone in physics is combination of 3 theories. Quantum mechanics, that subatomic, those things that you see in front of you, boson, Higgs, boson, elements of not only atom, but within the atom, the neutron and proton. And we're talking like black magic, not black, it's positive, right? But the Rosetta, to understand physics, those 3 theories have to come together. Quantum mechanics, in other words, quantum physics, gravitational field, in other words, now, you remember about a year ago, physicists finally discovered the vibration in gravity, proving the theory that there is something more than just nothingness or ether. It's some sort of, wave, some sort of field that exists, that gravitational field. And of course, beautiful theory, beautiful sciences that are new, which is the thermodynamics. The fluctuations or flowing of heat from hot to cold, right? Cold absorbs heat from the hot. In other words, black holes. Is it true that nothing can escape black hole or not? If those 3 theories one day, God willing, will come together, they will be like Rosetta Stone for this, everything. We would know it. And you see, parts of it, like that Large Hadron Collider, is one of the elements to build those theories. And then that beautiful phrase, story that you hear from time to time about, let's say, theory of strings, right? What it is. Because by analogy, that's the way to learn it the best. When you see guitar, right? When you pluck the string, it vibrates, produces the sound and the wave, right? You can hear it, feel it. And the same idea applies to the many blocks, the very fiber of the universe, that they are built in such a way that they vibrate all the time. That's the idea of us living, having experience of time, being only when we bump the heads, interact with one another. When we not, do we exist? Do you hear the tree falling in the forest? That's the whole philosophical idea. Quantum mechanics, quantum physics seems to prove it. Like electrons, they only appear when the system is moving. Yes, it loses energy, but produces also those gluons, that very tiny elements that keep everything together, like boson, Higgs boson is one of them. But it's more than that, because only then we realize that we are alive when we interact with one another. That is why maybe you see, in addition to all what we have said, Heraclitus, philosopher who lived 400 years before Jesus was born, said something, because all of those philosophers, as you remember, could we have a few more minutes? I know it's after 8, but could we go again for a few more minutes? All those ancient philosophers would say, what is the beginning of of universe? What is the building block that is so common to everything? That word, remember that word, arche, the beginning of it? Heraclitus would say it's change and logos. He uses the phrase logos for a reason. He's not astrophysicist. He's not Stephen Hawking. He's not Einstein. He does not know this. You see, here, with the inflation or explosion of all random possibilities into one, and information encoded in you and I, which is how John in his gospel says it, in the beginning was what? Was the word, the logos, the same word that John uses that 400 years before John, a Greek philosopher Heraclitus used. The one who says, pantare, you cannot, everything flows, you cannot step twice into the same river. That's why philosophy is fascinating, my friends. Fascinating. It can help us as Catholics. And I know I'm dreaming, but if you don't have dreams, they never come true. That's the reality of it. Some, even of 1,000 ones, if one comes true, it's a success, I think. But when we study those things, when we talk about those things, when we make, you see, and that's the catch, sense of it, that sense infuses or helps us to decode the information that was infused in us 14 billion years ago. With all that, you see? Yes, some people, like your children, right? You let them, they have to burn their feet a little bit, burn their finger before they realize that's hot, you don't touch it. But we don't have to do that in a global scale. And that is why maybe the second part or the final part of the talk today, and in the handouts you have a couple of things that I'd like to touch with you because tempus fugit, time is running away. A couple of things I'd like to touch with you. One is, of course, that experiment. Remember we talked about this on the occasion of our talk on George Orwell in 1984, and then Bulhakov's Master and Margarita when we talked about Marxism and Leninism. When we talk also about something that American scientist did, John Calhoun, when he did that experiment Universe 25, when he created a paradise for mice, remember? We talked about this when the mice had everything and anything, no predators, no threat. And remember what happened in 2 generations? When they produced, so to speak, the handsome one, the mice that I call snowflake, that couldn't do nor wanted to anything, just eat, sleep, even lost taste to procreate. And eventually population started to die down. So you see, communism does not work. But in any ways, that's one of the things I wanted to touch about. You might remember this. But the other is something that is also within your package in the handout, which is a little bit of explanation of what that critical theory is as far as it comes to Marxism. Because between the topic and vast, vast ocean of from Big Bang to Gulag and Auschwitz, what went wrong, I went wrong with very, very bad decisions I made. And only me. It's not because my mom, my dad, it's not because alcohol or drugs or sex obsession. No, I made that first step, first choice that initiated the avalanche of bad in my life. And that's what Jesus says. Remember those moments when Pharisees come to him and say, Jesus, whose fault was it that that tower fell and killed all those 70 people there? Who sinned, them or their parents? Remember what Jesus says? You fools, Jesus called them. It has nothing to do with that. You and only you is responsible for your own actions and outcome of it. And then yet, that idea of critical race theory, the best explanation of it for what it is, and it is of course offshoot of Marxism. Marxism in essence and Leninism, as we talked about, has the idea of societies, or as they call it, class struggle, of working class and ruling class, of poor and wealthy, of merchants and then maybe bankers and this and that. total struggle, everyone is fighting with everyone, and that's how revolution happens. You see, in revolution, to achieve materialistic society rid of God, rid of goodness in the Christian or revelation value of it, society where everybody is equal, but someone, hence guardians of the revolution, have to guard it. Right? If it was so innocent and good, there's no need for guardians. It would run itself, you see. Nobody would cheat, so to speak. And then critical race theory, it uses the same methodology, you see. Outcome is different. It does not call for revolution. But what happened in Germany in the 30s, some of those philosophers and psychologists tried to create something called critical theory and apply it to different stratas of societies. And then because Hitler shut it down, war happened, entire movement moved to Columbia University in New York. Dr. Cornel West, that very outspoken black man, is one of those, you might follow him or know him, one of those teachers from Columbia who is living part of that. But when it applies, that critical theory methodology is applied to race, you see, we have pure Marxism. The fight of races. In other words, you have the little explanation of it that everything you do is not based on merit or how hard you work, but preconditioned racial issues, racism, especially in America, but also in Western Hemisphere. You see, the best way, the beautiful way someone deals and finally rebuffs that theory and then pursuit of it in academia, in schools, is, you remember that beautiful professor lady Condoleezza Rice, right? She was on The View, which I watch from time to time when I need to laugh, with all the respect, but really, it's funny. I think it's a funny show, talk show, morning show. Condoleezza Rice was on The View, precisely about critical race theory on, if I'm not mistaken, October 20 or 26, whatever, of this year. And she said this, and I quote here on this handout, among many other things. She says this: I would like black kids, she is black / I guess South American, right? I would like black kids to be completely empowered to know they are beautiful in their blackness. But in order to do that, I don't have to make white kids feel bad for being here or being white. I hope you see, my friends, how deceiving is that methodology applied to race, hence critical race theory, because it causes only revolution in different way, on different level. But you know what I'm talking about. You all know it. We don't have to go into the details. Yes, racism absolutely is tangible, visible, and many of us might be one. For a day or two, when we come to our senses, we shake it off and say, that's unthinkable. I can't do that. It's not real. I try to be a better person than that. But to say that this should be modus operandi of what we do in America from now on, my friends, I hope you see it. Look up on YouTube. It's still archived. They're going to pull it off, of course, because it's gaining traction, that material. Just type it, Condoleezza Rice on The View in October on critical race theory. Beautifully, because she's a professor, beautiful, eloquent, step-by-step saying for what it is. Yes, I was black. I suffered this, but it was not because I was black. You see? I, personally, me. So that's the one of the points I hope maybe you will find a little helpful about the critical race theory. Then in the insert, in the stack of papers, you also have those 5-page little handout that gives you a few ideas. It's a good read. Simply, I put it together for a talk a few years back. I thought I will include it with you about where we come from, about the difficulty and problem some people have about us becoming, evolution versus creation. Is there a differences there, or war? Or they are exclusive, mutually exclusive? Absolutely not. And what Catholic Church says about this, we have all that. But a few last handouts in the pile, my friends, are those that trouble me the most, those two scans. Those are maps. One is the map of the Second World War, map of Europe with the concentration and death camps on the lands occupied by Germany. Those camps happened long before, especially concentration camps, long before Second World War broke. It evolved eventually to something with the red signatures, death camps, when people were killed massively because of differences of, you name it, opinion, or races, for that matter. You see what the critical race theory can lead to? Never, never, never be seduced by it. Say it and take it for what it is. It is methodology used by Marxism and Leninism applied to races instead of societies, instead of stratas of society, you see, instead of clans, classes, with the same outcome, revolution. And then on the back of it, you see something that is even more troubling, which is the map of so-called Russian Empire, or back then Soviet Union, with a little explanation of what Gulag is, because it still is. It never was. It happened in time, but some of those camps that were once death and labor camps, that you see the points on the vast, vast, huge Soviet Empire map, and you have some numbers up to only the time when Stalin died in 53 or 56, I don't remember exactly, but you have it, right? And how many people were in those camps and died, and it is still happening. Some serve as museums, but some serve as, how do we call it? It is in North Korea, it is in China, it comes from Soviet Union, it comes from Bolshevik Revolution. Germans did not come up with concentration and death camps. They were those beautiful characters like Mr. Lenin and Bronstein Davidovich called Trotsky, or Dzerzhinsky, who flirted with Frida Kahlo in Mexico and plotted some of this with her. And we enjoy her paintings. Of course we do, and it's a different story, but take it for what it is, my friends. Take it for what it is. This man came up with the ideas, and they were just transferred into what? How do we call them? How some strata, some people in our society would like to treat those who think freely. They would like to send us to re-educational centers. That's how they are called in China. And believe me, if we don't change something, they will pop here in this country. They will. This is a matter of time. They will be called re-educational centers. Like, hello, George Orwell, and then 1984, or Animal Farm. Rings the bell? That man who traveled to Soviet Union to see some of those, how quickly he changed his mind from being ideologue, which we have in the educational centers of America, to like refugee from Cuba who makes hard living in Miami and is fuming from every single ear hole or eye hole when he thinks that socialism should come to America. Explain it to the Cuban immigrant who made it for his family or her family, escaped for that very reason. It's just an example of many that we go on. And therefore, my friends, often when I think about those things, and the topic for today, from the Big Bang to Gulag and Auschwitz, what went wrong, it scares me in a way. How something intended to be so beautiful by our Creator, we can mess up. And then it's a theory, philosophical theory called historiosophy and historicity. They use it simultaneously. That tells you that when you study history, when you trace back our steps and everything that happened, with that tracing back, you would discover certain patterns of behavior and things popping. Something, in other words, you learn from the history, right? You don't repeat the history because you will repeat the same punishments and same mistakes if you don't learn from it. That theory says that, among many other beautiful things, that every 90 to 110 years, major conflict happens. Major catastrophe, man-made. In other words, war on conflict. Not natural disasters, no. We don't have control over those. A little bit now with what we do, we can limit it. But those wars, man-made disasters. And when we try to think about our experience of last 120 years, think of it, from Europe to America, or when you zoom back a little bit with the wars between Civil War here in America and American-Mexican wars, you name it. In every continent, in every culture, it happens. That theory says that if it's true, if it has some hint, some validity to it, they say every 90 to 110 years, major war, major tragedy happens. And the glitch was, and that's why that theory is not pursued any longer the way it was once, is that between First World War, that happened when? Remember? Happened 1914, right? And ended in 17. Devour millions of lives, human lives. Between First War and Second War, how many years passed? Do your math. For the sake of the argument, just easy it, so from 1919 to 1939. You see how fast another tragedy happens? Is it a fluke in that theory, or it proves that it accelerates only? Those were global wars, world war wars we call them, you see, that devour numbers. My friends, it's chilling. Millions of lives, millions. We're not talking about an accident when 2 or 10 people die. Millions of people exterminated because I wanted it. I made, you see, that decision about moral evil. That is why it bothers me so much, that element of today's topic, what went wrong. Someone made that decision. And then we don't read about this, talk about this, think about this because it's so far from our borders. But what about the war in former Yugoslavia? Look what happened. What happened to those lands and those people? And still ticking bomb, I believe, is Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. If I read correctly, Putin, he's going to fire off that bomb of Serbia or Bosnia very soon. Very soon. It's just a matter of time. I think, if I read him correctly, to cover his annex of what country now? Ukraine and Syria. We can't forget those things. Only because we left does not mean others did. No, they came in. You see, history, everything, you and I, universe does not like vacuum. Stronger and more ruthless power comes and overcomes your peaceful Christianity you thought was so bad once. No, it's not. And I hope you also see, my friends, that because of that, because it's far away, how much do I know about Rwanda and genocide? We don't even remember it. When millions of people were killed only because they belonged to another tribe. How quickly we forgot that 5 years ago, in entire Middle East, Syria, Afghanistan, and Iran, parts of it, of course, Iran was controlled a little bit more stably, in stable way. When you were Christian, what happened? Catholic to your head. Right? And all those ancient monuments of ancient cultures between Lebanon and Mesopotamia and Syria. We can't see them anymore. They were completely destroyed by the people who made liberal, conscious decision to kill because God wants it. You see how that religion goes? It is better for you to die than to enter into paradise maimed. With 2 hands but sinful. You know what I mean? It's better for you to die if you don't want to convert to our faith in Allah and his prophet Muhammad. You see? That's another example of it. Another example of, I think, what went wrong is, my friends, something that pains me to say also is us losing what you still have, human heart. When it becomes cold, when my heart becomes just stone or iceberg, when, in other words, I'm becoming very cynical nothing else and no one else matters, I don't care, so to speak, that's what it happens. Slowly, it cripples in slowly. It doesn't happen like a nuke, like atomic bomb, no. But you see that evil, and I'm not talking about physical evil that we try to explain, decay, equilibrium, dying, us onto death, like Martin Heidegger would like to say. We are timely beings, yes, of course, but we are onto death. We're dying effectively. I'm talking about moral evil, decisions that I make. And I follow him. I follow him and his podcast and his YouTubes because I think he is going to be remembered as one of the geniuses and voices for good in this generation, Dr. Jordan Peterson. Are you familiar with him and who he is and the books he wrote and podcasts he now has, shares with his daughter? In one of the recent ones, he says this: when I have an opportunity to tell the truth and I keep silent, I lie. My friends, how right on target he is. We need to see ourselves for who we are. Good, hardworking people. Not black, white, not wealthy, not poor. But like Jesus tries to awake us to that reality through Paul's letters. There is no Greek or Jew or Hebrew or that or slave or free person when we think about what Jesus did for us and we try to follow. And we're losing it. We're losing it completely, my friends. I hope you see it. Some of those ideas, theories we talked about today, tonight, and maybe the reasons why evil exists in the world is because on that scale, on that balance, like Leibniz says, of the best possible worlds that exist, that scale is tilted off again. That world becomes not so best anymore. It loses its balance, I think, when you try to find the word to describe it. Because I think when we become cynical, when we try to, again, close ourselves in our own bunkers and don't see my neighbor, another, or as French Jewish philosophers, especially after the Auschwitz, after the Holocaust, they like to come up with those philosophies, ideas like Emmanuel Levinas or Martin Buber, who experienced, the atrocities of concentration and death camps, and they said, how God can exist? How he can allow this to happen? We have to redevelop completely our ethics and philosophy and morality. There was no morality in death camp. You see, everything was suspended. That's why they come with those ideas of the border experiences and come up with new philosophies about so-called the other, that unless you see the face of God in the eyes of total stranger, I won't talk to you. But how genuinely intuitive they are. Unless we try to do that again, I don't want to scare you, therefore no skull, human skull by the hourglass, but I hope you see it, my friends. We better do something, wake up. It's not you, but I'm talking about our younger generation. How many beautiful children we have among us, and how only a fraction comes, do something with us, like the people of faith, or still are interested in it, or try to follow. And they have so much to say of that treasury, you see, of our critical thinking and our faith. But they choose to, you see, not to. Jordan Peterson says it, if you don't say the truth, if you know that is the truth and you have to say it, if you don't, if you just keep quiet for many different reasons, bullying, shame, what have you, shyness, you lie. It's a lie. It's a current modern form of lying when you think about this. Please, don't try to do that at your Thanksgiving table. Just lie. Just lie with big smile because they won't invite you again when you open your mouth about this. Just nod along. Yes, of course, great gravy. But please be aware of those things, my friends. Thank you very much for tonight. I hope this was something that you enjoyed. But don't toss the handouts. It's a load of information here. Maybe on your free time, just go over it and you will remind yourself of some of it, and you will have some incentives maybe here to read a little bit, one thing or two about this. Because my friends, something, believe me, like John Paul even said that, John Paul II, our Pope, people who do not take those lessons, especially terrible ones from the history, are doomed to repeat it again. I'm sorry to say that, but I believe in it. I believe that. We think the educational centers are far away in some far, far away galaxy? No, Mr. Darth Vader. No, they are around the corner in just a matter of time. Your president, our president, Reagan, said that beautifully, how that freedom is only away, right, from ceasing to exist. Fight for it, always, always. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. Again.